Good to go? Oh, yes. Welcome to the annual American-Irish debate. I'm Brent Northup, and I coordinate the affair, although the gentleman on the stage and your hostess for the evening will be the center of attention in a few seconds. I will give you just a couple pieces of background on the Irish debate. It was started some time ago by Gary Holbrook, who put the program together in the tour of the United States until the mid-90s, at which point NPDA and myself have been organizing it. It's interesting to know how the Irish are chosen. Debate in Ireland is in World Debate, as many of you participated in World Debate. They have a year-long competition around the various cities of Ireland, which are in essence octos, quarters, semis, and so forth, building up to a final in February, in which the 4 best teams that have survived the elimination join the 4 best individuals. It's different in an interesting respect, because supposing that you were 4th in a tournament, but you were top speaker, you would advance as an individual. So the top speakers move along, in essence, with the top debate teams, and then there is a final in which the judges are asked to pick one of the 4 teams as the best team, one of the 4 individuals as the best individual, but it's also possible that one of those on the team could be picked as the best speaker individual. And out of that comes 3 Irish national champions, your championship team and your championship individual, who are crowned the champions of Ireland. It would be the equivalent at this tournament of the top team and our top speaker being America's best. And that's how the competition proceeds. Tonight we got a slight wrinkle, which I think you will enjoy. I've decided that why not put a little more spark into the MC role, so I've invited Kristen Owen from Texas Tech University to be the hostess tonight for the Irish-American debate. A couple of notes about Kristen. You may know this already. First of all, what you may not know is she's a triple major in political science, econ, and communication, who intends to go on to coach and then to grad school, perhaps in communication. Some of you know that she was a semifinalist at NPDA last year at this same tournament. And this year, she's on the #1 ranked team in the country in NPTE. I thought, given that she is a fine debater and an even finer person, that it would be wonderful to have her MC the American-Irish debate tonight, and then I'll be back at the close of the debate to make some presentations. So I will turn it over to your hostess, Kristen Owen.
Thank you, Brent, and thank everyone for being here. I'm going to try and keep this short because I'm not very funny and all of my jokes are under the stage, and that's what you came to see these boys for. So I'm just going to introduce them a little, tell you a little bit about them, but I think that Brent is a little bit wrong about what this debate is about. To me, this debate is about freedom. And I think it's really important that all of you in the audience support our Freedom Dream Team against the commie Euro bastards. So, with that said, we're going to introduce the, light-witted Irish to my left. We first got John Gallagher, who's going to be speaking first. He prefers not to be called JJ, so all of you should yell that at him very loudly during his speech. He studies history and French, which is more evidence that he's a commie bastard. We prefer, yes, I was just going to say that. We prefer to refer to that as freedom. He fancies himself the comedian of the group, so we'll have to see about that, and hopefully he'll do a better job of entertaining you. But I'm sure he's been preparing his lines for hours leading up to the debate. Sometimes you gotta get a little worked up laying out those lines. Next to him is Stephen Boyle, who's a history and English major at the University College of Dublin, and he has reached quarterfinals and semifinals in the Irish finals debate before his individual accolade this year. He talked a lot about his family in his background information, about how his father's a researcher and his mother is a news editor and his brother is a black belt, which is basically to cover up for the fact that he is not in fact funny at all. So, our friend Stephen is going to be in the middle speech so that you can forget him by the end of the debate. And And speaking finally on the side of the Irish is going to be Chris Chrisan, who is a history major at Trinity. All three of these boys are into history, which again is more evidence that they're going to be more boring than our American friends this year. But he is in fact half American, which means not only will he be more boring than usual, but he might actually make better arguments, which is why they put him in the last position. It's their one chance of winning this debate this year. And we think that, regardless of the fact that he's been in the Irish Times finals twice and a semifinal debater twice, that his American background might give him some fancy moves on the debate floor, but it's certainly not going to beat our dream team. So let's talk about them. Speaking first is our All-American cowboy, Jess Ryan, who is, heck yeah. Oh, he's last, you're right. Speaking first is going to be Adam Price. He's, he's a political science, he's a political science by, again, our freedom team. Science and religion major from Colorado College here in Colorado Springs, and he's got a great GPA, which, not only indicates that he has nothing better to do with his time, but also indicates that because of their unique scheduling, he gets to cram all of his drinking into the weeks in between, which means that Adam is pretty much going to go toe-to-toe with these boys this weekend. But we would also point out that he's our national student rep, which is not so much an indication that the community likes him so much as we couldn't find anyone better. It's true. He likes to talk about American politics all the time. He's going to be the one here standing up for our government and why we should be spreading democracy to the rest of the world. So you guys are going to have to give it up for Adam. But after him, and when he debates. After him is going to be Eric Atchison, who's from Lewis and Clark. He decided to put his hat back on. I think that is probably a good choice. The one thing that he didn't change, that his good friend and coach Kyle Hunsicker pointed out to me, is these 70-year-old man loafers that he wears all the time, that he's wearing with his brand new suit tonight. I'd like all of you to do a good job of making fun of him, and I'm sure that the Irish would do so as well. But we'd also like to point out that since Adam is our politics guy, Eric is our irony guy, and that's absolutely exemplified by the fact that he's an Armenian Christian from Kansas, and he attends the land of godless hippies in America at Lewis and Clark University. Eric has lived irony in every moment of his life and will continue to do so. We would also argue, Eric models his debate style after the late, great, not dead, but definitely out of the community, Keith West, who also, who had a good time with his partner Paul Bingham, who rocked the Irish a couple of years ago. But we think that maybe Eric's style is looking a little bit more like Conrad Hacks nowadays, so clean it up, Eric. Clean it up. The last thing I'd like to say about Eric is he's going to be a man with the cloth in the future, so any of you guys that get cut out of the tournament too early and need a quickie marriage to make yourself feel better, he's the man to go to. So finally, representing the heartland of America is Jess Ryan, who is a senior communication and art major from the art minor from the University of Wyoming. He does a lot of pottery and art, and in order to overcompensate for how that diminishes his masculinity in the eyes of all of his peers, he also helps lead people on mountaineering and fishing trips. Basically, he teaches rich people to fish and young kids to enjoy the outdoors, which, is all well and good for him, but from personal experience, Jess is a horrible fishing teacher. The last time I tried to go out with him, I ended up literally waist high in the mud in Wyoming. Our argument is that you would never want to trust Jess in a debate round or in the middle of a lake. But the good thing about him is that he does spend his free time tracking down terrorists in the mountains. He's really good at seeking them out, finding the hidden caves because of his experience, and we think that because you're either with us or against us, that Jess is going to be our man to take down the liberal commies from across the pond. So basically, Rocket America. You're going to see a lot of freedom talk tonight out of these boys, and a lot of rappy talk about terrorists from these boys. Our position as Americans in this round will have to be to vote for the Americans. We've let our country down too many times before in the past. I know I'm not a member of this debate, but if I were, I darn well tell you I would be representing this country. I am not debating. No. There's a perfectly good reason why I'm not debating in this debate, and that's just because I'm too good. Sorry.
We'll just start with
Our
that.
speaker is going to be John Gallagher, who's going to be affirming the resolution.
What resolution? That's a very good question. Ready? The resolution is that this House, that the US should boycott the Beijing Olympics. The 2008 Beijing Olympics, not one we've made up. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It's all very good to see you. I'm sorry we don't get to talk about freedom on the Irish side. We haven't had much experience of freedom. We had 800 years of foreign oppression compared to the United States, which had roughly 2 weeks. But like American presidential candidates, we're going to base our case mainly on, abstract nouns. So we're not talking about freedom. We're definitely going to talk about change, terror, and love. But yeah, no, it was very good. I don't know if people know, but Kristen stepped in at the last minute to MC tonight. Not sure why. Apparently, Pastor Jeremiah Wright cancelled at the last minute. We're not really sure why, so that was a bit of a kick in the teeth. But we're all very honoured, and we're all very proud to be here and for you to have us. So thank you all very much. It's wonderful to be here at an Air Force base. I can't help but feel like an extra in Top Gun. And I'm sure the same is true of Stephen Iceman Boyle and Christopher Maverick Kassan. We're told the prize for this debate will be a ride in an F-16. Good way to arrive back at the Best Western. So today we're going to be talking about boycotting the Olympics, which is, both a good idea and the morally and objectively right idea. And there are two ways to do it. Either the US could send absolutely no one to the Olympics, which is what we call a traditional boycott, or we could go for a non-traditional boycott, where they just send lots of really ugly fat people. At the beginning of every race, the American ugly fat people and all of the people who joined with them from the international community just stand there wheezing. Not for the minute, but they're going to stand there wheezing while, the athletes from perfectly morally upstanding countries like, Iran, Sudan, China and Britain run around them. But just to briefly introduce the team, as I said, Stephen Iceman Boyle, as you can see from the look of him, he has your lucky charms. Stephen will be asking, has China changed? He'll be saying that China, in the run-up to the Olympics, has pulled the wool over the world's eyes, has pulled the great wool of China, if you will, over everyone's eyes. Thank you, that took hours. Christopher Maverick Kassan, he's half American, we're not sure which half. We do know he doesn't look particularly American, was compared by Brent yesterday to Al-Qaeda, all of them in one man. He's going to be talking about the US, he's going to be talking about freedom, and he's going to be talking about hypocrisy. But now I'm going to have a chat about a couple of things. First of all, a point that should really not take that long. China are bad people. Second of all, I'm going to talk about the Olympics and what they mean. And finally, I'm going to talk about why we should boycott them and why that's the best way to deal with China. So first of all, are China bad? Okay, I'm going to throw out some things here, and we can have a straw poll as to whether they are good things or bad things. Re-education and labour camps, systematic torture of political prisoners, using the death penalty against thousands of people per year, even for non-violent crimes, targeted infanticide and abortion, organ harvesting, spatial and social apartheid, and forced rehousing of people they don't like the look of. No thanks. So, if you're in favour of those things, that's fine, because you will probably fight me. But all of those things are very, very bad. They're not things we accept. They're violations of human rights. They're violations of human dignity. They're not the kind of things that the international community should accept. We would also say that China are also apparently on the list of countries that John McCain has decided are supporting Al-Qaeda, a list that now includes, since yesterday, France, Scotland, and Norway. So, there you go. But yeah, we think it's pretty fair to say that the Chinese are a bad regime with little to no respect for any kind of human rights. And we don't think much has changed since they were offered the Olympics. So this second point is going to be about the Olympics. We say, what should the Olympics be about? The Olympics should be about all of humanity coming together. goals of excellence and of common hope to decide who are the greatest athletes and who has the very best drugs. So we think that's but the fact is, the Olympics means hope. It's come along from the time when it was naked Greek men. We think nowadays it's a time when we get together and we celebrate what we have in common. But to suggest that the Olympics isn't political is, what, rubbish? Yeah, okay, it basically makes no sense. We say that you make huge political gains if you get the Olympics. We say that China gets huge economic and social gains, but it also gets the chance to put on a national showcase, to say China is developing, to say China looks good, to say China is a country that you want to trade with, China is a country that you want to deal with. We think in that sense it's political because it's a means for people to increase their international standing. And we think that's why it is fundamentally political. But we want to look at China's promises to the IOC. One, they said, our goal is to spread the Olympic ideals among our people. Now, stealing their organs, but we think that's not a particularly good way of doing it. We think forcing people and using the internet as, or internet? Don't even have that in Ireland. we just have cans and pieces of string across the country. Achieve this goal is unacceptable. They said the Olympics of 2008 will help promote our social progress and will also benefit the further development of our human rights agenda. Well, we say yes, in the sense that your human rights agenda consists of torturing people and imprisoning them without trial, and then having show trials for dissident leaders. We think they haven't I'm going to take you in a second. They haven't given us any of the positive benefits that they promised to the IOC. We say that when they've reneged on a deal as big as this, we don't see why we should still give them the present. And you might answer that, sir.
Yes, you keep talking about the human rights violations and things that are going on. Are you describing China or the United States?
Well, first of all, I'm describing China. Second of all, the reason that's not relevant is because the US isn't hosting the Olympics, right? We have the chance where a nation has come up and said, we are going to have better human rights in order to get the Olympics. And they didn't do that, so we're going to punish them. We think that's totally fair. We might punish the US. Perhaps as a countermodel, we would suggest that we should just invade everyone else who has bad human rights, just to shortcut that particular line of argument. Maybe not. Right, China really bad, let's do what we can. So, they lied, they reneged on their promises, and then they killed lots of people, which we don't accept. But why an Olympic boycott? Why not something like a trade boycott? Well, we say the Olympics, we've said it's about international appearance, but that's not all. Within a regime like China, the Olympics is about making the Chinese government look really, really good to the people of China. It's used to project the image of a strong China who's supported by the world and whom the world respects to the Chinese people. People who don't have access to a free media, people who don't get to comment on things, people who don't necessarily know what's actually going on, because they can't get Wikipedia, they can't get, I think, the BBC website, and they probably can't get any of our lefty papers that we have in Ireland on the interweb. So, you know, a bit of trouble there. But the fact is, we can show them, by refusing to go, we can show them that Olympics, where only Sudan, North Korea, and Iran are running in the races. We can show them that we do not support what their government is doing. Because the fact is, a totalitarian government begins to lose its power over its people when they begin to see the disparity between the propaganda they hear and the realities on the ground. That's what happened in East Germany, ladies and gentlemen, when they started to say, well, the paper is telling me we have lots of bread and everyone loves us, but I'm really hungry. People started to lose faith in that regime because they saw that the propaganda was lies. Everyone, ladies and gentlemen, no thank you, who goes to participate in these Olympics, every nation that goes to participate is supporting China, is allowing China to give a positive image of itself out to its citizens who are under a brutal totalitarian regime. And we should not allow them to do this, ladies and gentlemen. If we believe in freedom, if we believe in democracy, ladies and gentlemen, and for God's sake, if we believe in sportsmanship, this is not something that we can allow. It's by talking to the people that we make change. No, thank you. And that's something that doesn't necessarily happen in a trade boycott, because not everyone tunes in to the markets, ladies and gentlemen. Not everyone is getting photos from the opening ceremony and from every race, ladies and gentlemen. And that's very, very important to remember. So that's why it's different. And that's why we should boycott the Olympics specifically. So basically, what I told you about was that China are bad. We've yet to see a huge amount of dissent arising from this side of the debate. I told you about what the Olympics mean, and how China have perverted this. And you stood up when I said no, come on. And we told you how China have perverted what the Olympics should actually mean. And we finally showed you how boycotting the Chinese Olympics allows us to reach those people we've never gotten to before, the people of China. Because, ladies and gentlemen, it's not in ICBMs and it's not in diplomatic pressure. The change in China is really going to come in the long term. It's going to come from a change of people's minds. When people decide to say, this is not enough. I do not want to be a part of a nation that is an international pariah. And this is the first step. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very honored. Thank you.
The Irish benefit from the lack of timekeeper.
Thank you, John.
7 minutes and I'll sit up here.
John knows enough ways to say no, as I'm sure the girls in Ireland know how to say to him. But, you know, he talks about feeling like an extra on Top Gun here at the Air Force Academy, and I think that all of our American friends would agree. We wish they looked a little bit more like the lead. Yeah, it's how they win these debates every year. It's true. You know, they talk about East Germany and the situation there, and the situation in Germany, I think, is really applicable to this debate because the American cavalry is about to ride in and save the day. So, Adam Prince, our next speaker.
I still get time for thank yous, right, Brent? Thank yous and jokes? Okay, I'm gonna use those. So I'd like to thank a few people for being here. I'd like to thank the Irish for coming, though this is the first year they really haven't sent cute people, so I'm really a little devastated at that. I'd like to thank Brent and the selection committee, especially Kristen, who's kind of the hotness. We haven't really applauded for her yet, so if we could give her a round of applause. She's phenomenal, and if she took my place up here, it would be a much better debate. I'd like to thank the CC administration, Dean Mike Edmonds, Dean Jeff Cathy, and President Dick Celeste, who are wonderfully supportive of debate. I'd like to thank USAFA for hosting this tournament. I'd like to thank their top team, half of them, Matt. I don't want to thank Josh because he's kind of a whore for attention. So that would make him feel too good about himself if I talked about him up here. I'd also like to thank our coach, Scott Weaver, who has done a phenomenal job this year, and CC's really going to miss out on not having you around next year to help us out. And you're really an asset to the debate community, and I hope you stay in it. And then I'd like to thank our former coaches, Bonnie Stapleton and Chris Shaw. For those of you who don't know Chris Shaw, he's the one who finally hit puberty this year at age 24. And he did a great job in the past of teaching me patience and how to deal with people who I didn't like that much. I'd also like to thank my partner, Julian, for backpacking me around the country this year. He's kind of like Kristen, and I'm kind of like Anthony Putnicki. He does all the work, and I get some of the credit. He's also like I'd also like to thank two of our novices, Joel and Chuckles. Chuckles will always be near and dear to my heart. And then my family and friends. My stepdad and my mom have been really supportive of me in debate. And my friends came up here to watch me talk about China. They're right over there. They're pretty awesome. So thank you all. You're fantastic. Now, real debate. The Irish talk a lot about freedom and a lot about hope and a lot about change, but the fact of the matter is they never give you a reason why the Chinese are going to change anything if we don't go to the Olympics. Our argument is that the Chinese are just going to get way more pissed off at us and freak out if we go away from the biggest economic gain to their country over the next 10 or 100 years. And we think that that's problematic already, man. Sit down. Our first argument is something we like to call Chinese freak out. Basically, at present, China is a rational economic actor, right? Hu Jintao, their premier, uses economic growth as a way to placate the nationalists who prop him up in power as premier of China. They view economic power, though, as zero-sum. If they lose economically, they have to increase their power elsewhere, generally using the military in order to make up for it. The reason this is a problem is that the Olympics are seen as the major economic event for China this year. They're expecting to get $120 billion of revenue into their economy this year. Not only for their government, but also for the people and businessmen who depend on the Chinese economy. We would argue that if the United States pulls out of the Olympics, I'll talk to you later, Al-Qaeda. If the United States pulls out of the Olympics, other countries are going to as well. This is empirically proven in Moscow in 1980. The United States boycotted the Olympics, and 61 other nations followed suit. We think that whenever China is challenged economically, they respond with force. Just look back to 1994. The United States denied China most favored nation status, and they responded rationally by shooting missiles at Taipei. Whenever you do things that upset China, they respond with force, generally nuclear force, against people. And we think that that's always going to be worse than all of these amorphous things they're talking about that the United States does too. I think that the unique thing that China does is that they shoot weapons at people when they get pissed off. I told you in a bit, Al-Qaeda. You are so needy. We think that China would most likely respond in Tibet, because they're viewed as the reason for the boycott, because of the killing of monks recently. We think that they would use lethal force, even with monks, because China thinks that bullets beat meditation. I said 1 second. All right, go ahead.
Yeah, but is this compared to like the lovely treatment Tibet are currently getting from China?
Yeah, we're going to argue that it would be way worse if the United States pulled out of the Olympics. Also because only by going to the Olympics can we allow the Tibetans and the Chinese access to foreign journalists who can actually document their plight for the rest of the world and not depend on Chinese government-run media to tell the world what's going on in Tibet. We think that the idea that only 500 monks have died is ludicrous, and we want the real data, and we want that to happen because the only way we can do that is with journalists there. We think the impact of this is severalfold. First, that the current protests are going to be crushed and thousands of monks, hundreds of thousands of monks, are going to be killed. But more importantly is that it's going to preclude future solvency in the region because China is probably going to keep a presence in Lhasa, Tibet, which they haven't done now, which means future protests can't happen. And if we want protests to be able to happen, if we want freedom and we want hope, we need China not to think that they need to crack down on Lhasa. Our next argument is that China only cares when you watch. We call this voyeurism. We also call it John Gallagher's preference. We would tell you that right now in China, poor people are starving, and that China has displaced hundreds of thousands of people for construction of Olympic things, like stadiums. But in response to that, they've given these people jobs at these Olympics so that they could be able to help themselves economically. Yeah, fact. What?
So you're saying that because some people got jobs and some people got relocated to labor camps, overall.
I don't think you're making the argument that people got relocated to labor camps. You're just saying that labor camps exist in China, and I think that that's going to get worse when they prop them up in the middle of Tibet when we piss them off. We would tell you that without the Olympics, China's not going to give jobs to these people or build infrastructure like water purification, food distribution, and housing. These are things that are only going to happen if China needs to increase its norms for the international community coming to the area. We think that China only cares about poor people when the world is watching, and if nobody comes to the Olympics, the world's not going to be watching anymore, and China's going to start just systematically killing poor people and sending them to death camps. We think that that's bad because the Olympics are the linchpin for boosting the lower and middle class in Beijing. Literally millions of people are counting upon these Olympics happening in order to have jobs, in order to put food on the table, and in order to get health care for themselves and their family. Nah. We think that this has a couple of impacts. The first is that people are going to die because they don't have money to buy things like food, housing, water, and that China's not going to increase its environmental protections, which we think are crucial to be able to have things like better air quality in the region. We think that walking around China is kind of like being around John's hair, which is kind of a mullet. We think that this means there is no long-term solvency for these problems. This is one of the reasons the Olympics are here anyway. They tell you that the Olympics are there because China said that they would help with brotherhood and all these like words that Barack Obama talks about that don't really mean anything. Go Hillary. But we think, hell yeah. Right? No, I said no. You took like one, I took like 7. We think that this is just like why the World Cup is being put in South Africa in 2010. It's not because China is good now. It's because this event will make China better. And only by making China better in the future can we ever have all of these things that they're talking about be solved for. So let's talk about why we think our side is better. Nah. We think that the threat of a boycott is always going to be more effective than an actual boycott because holding something over the head of the Chinese is always going to make them listen more than actually just pulling out of the Olympics. If we pull out now, we have no bargaining power over the Chinese government, which means that we will never be able to foment long-term change in any of these regions. We think that when most favored nation status was denied, the 8 years before that, we just threatened that denial and we got a lot of concessions from China. We got them to increase their food distribution network, for example. But then, when we denied it, they shot missiles at Taiwan. We think that the solution is pretty clear. Lots of people die from missiles. China's still kind of bad, but could get better. The only way to make China better is by keeping the Olympics in China right now. They're never giving you an alternative. They never tell you why not engaging with China is going to be better. We think engagement is better because if China doesn't hold the Olympics, they're going to become more isolationist. That's going to create a stigma, which means that international journalists and the international community can't go into China and find out what's going on. If we boycott the Olympics, our citizens and our journalists don't go there. We need to stop listening to Fox News and state-run media. We need to find out what's going wrong. My time's up. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Adam. It's nice to see you right on the money today, since it's taken you like a year to figure out that Hillary's not the end-all and be-all of politics, and your whole life to figure out that you should have come out of the closet when everyone told you a year before. Next, it's true. Really, Adam? Really? Up next, we've got Stephen Boyle, who will steal your lucky charms and hopefully is going to explain to you why the Americans should boycott the Olympics in full. Stephen, for a minute. Speech now, 60 seconds.
Thank you, Madam Chair, ladies and gentlemen. As I look out across this beautiful vista, I think about how it welcome ceremony yesterday. The small child reading us a poem. Instead, we had to run off our plane, ladies and gentlemen, under heavy sniper fire. I'm sorry, I think I may have misspoken. Ladies and gentlemen, we thought it was interesting that it took the American team but a mere 1 minute and 30 seconds to resort to nuclear war as the outcome. Like, we thought it would come in there at some point, but that was pretty impressive. Apparently, China are going to get really angry and either nuke Tibet or kill all the monks there because they blame them for the fact that we've boycotted the Olympics. We think they probably have a slightly more nuanced view to their domestic and international and that if they go about killing the spiritual leaders of the people of a country they're trying to control, that it might be harder to control that country in the long term. But that's just one little aside, ladies and gentlemen. Because the other thing we heard, ladies and gentlemen, was this idea that an angry China is bad. Well, we're pretty okay with making them angry. That's pretty much the whole point. The reason that they're going to be happy at the moment, as John told you, is that we're giving them the picture postcard Olympics. We're giving them the ability to say to the world, this is how brilliant China is. This is the brilliant infrastructure we've built. These are our wonderful athletes who are going to top the gold medal chain. Nothing to do with drugs, by the way. These are our wonderful stadiums. These are our wonderful capacities. That's what we're giving them at the moment. We are complicit in their subservient status of their own people. They're going to round up and arrest thousands of people that they think may potentially cause trouble because these Olympics are happening. So as a direct result of the fact that they want to send their athletes to compete, thousands of people are going to be arrested. So I think that's something that people have to bear in mind. It's not like there are some tangible human rights consequences that are happening in China. It's as a direct result of the Olympics that people are going to be harmed. We also had this idea that there's going to be less revenue going into China. This is their economic linchpin for the year. Well, our hearts bleed that less arms are going to go to Khartoum as China props up the genocidal maniacs that exist there, ladies and gentlemen. We're not too bad about that one. We also have this idea about how the Tibetans are going to be able to gain the world stage. Tell us all about how many Tibetans are dying because the Olympics are going to be happening in China. Well, do you really think that the Chinese are going to let them talk like that? They have minder systems. As you can see from the way the Communist Party conference was organized in October, they're very good at presenting the public face. They're very good at presenting the message, and they're very good at presenting their PR. There is absolutely no reason to believe that the Western media will be able to have access to anything other than the games or anything other than what Chinese minders want them to have access to. It's a fallacy and a farce to say otherwise, ladies and gentlemen. And that's why we think that point doesn't. We also have this idea that China only cares when you watch. Well, we think China only cares when the world community are giving you attention, ladies and gentlemen. Firstly, we don't think the fact that giving people jobs in return for kicking them out of their houses is necessarily a good thing. We're wondering how better air quality necessarily affects your life when the government have already taken your lungs to sell on the international market. We're not quite sure how that one works out either. But basically, we also have this idea of water purification. Well, let's look at the fact that China have in fact been stealing the water and using the water from all around Beijing, draining it and creating droughts in all the surrounding areas in order to bring in water to Beijing. There might be purer water, there's an awful lot less of it, ladies and gentlemen. The last point we had was how we can foster long-term change. I love this idea that when we gave them most favoured nation status, when we withheld that, when we pushed them, we got concessions. Right, so what's happened since we gave them most favoured nation status, ladies and gentlemen? That's the question we have to ask ourselves. When we have the bargaining chip, even if we threaten a boycott, ladies and gentlemen, unless they, well, we don't think they're going to change their attitude seriously. But we think when the world community stands up to China, says to them that we are willing to take collective action, and we think that there will be some sort of coalition of the willing formed around the American boycott, ladies and gentlemen. What we think we get at there is the idea that we do send China that message, that we're not complicit in their games anymore. I'll take you on that.
All right, so if there's no good, like if we don't think China's going to listen when we boycott, why should we boycott if there's only a risk of bad things happening to the people who live in Tibet and Taiwan?
Okay, well, firstly, we don't agree that there are going to be more bad things happening to the people of Tibet and Taiwan. We think there's an active incentive for the Chinese to clamp down really hard on the Tibetans at the moment. As they already said when they said the Tibetans are trying to ruin the Olympics, they gave us a pretty clear idea that the reason that they're killing the Tibetans is that they don't want them to ruin the Olympics. They already said that direct link exists, ladies and gentlemen. In terms of the Taiwanese, maybe it was the fact that the Taiwanese closed down the reconciliation group in Taiwan the last time they fired missiles over them, ladies and gentlemen. It might have had something to do with that as well. The thing that I want to talk about now is cosmetic changes. The kind of ideas that we heard from them, that they are making moves in the right direction. Things like North Korea and Sudan might come up later in this, how they helped end North Korea's nuclear missiles, how they helped bring about a peacekeeping force in Sudan, where they still sell them weapons. But the reason that China are getting involved on the international stage in aspects like that is the exact same reason that they're stamping down on their own human rights domestically. It's because they want to be seen to be good rather than they want to act in an actually good way. And that's a very important distinction. Because, as they've already said themselves, these things are about the Olympics. The Olympics are important to their own national perception, ladies and gentlemen. Because, really, we have to ask ourselves as a world community, are the Olympics and politics something that are separate, or are they something that are linked? Over the course of the Games, we can see that an attempt to separate the politics and the sport is simply naive. When you get a global gathering on that scale, basically, it is now the civilized world's way of waging war with each other. No, thank you. It's the way we go up against each other. But when you doing so makes you directly complicit in the arrest and subjugation of thousands of people, the removal of their water, the removal of their resources, and the removal of their homes, it becomes not just the civilized version of war, but you allowing the Chinese to wage a war against their own people. Is that something that the global community wants in order to have another international games that will effectively be throat-riddled in the end anyway, ladies and gentlemen, when we find out 4 years later that they were all on the new version of the clear? Is that the kind of human rights version that we want? Is the kind of press freedom that we want in China the kind of thing that we want? The kind of press freedom where every press person will have a minder? Because we heard from them that we'll get this glorious press freedom. Well, let's look at the idea of what happened to Tibet at the moment. They're not exactly letting in the media there at the moment, are they, ladies and gentlemen? No, they're not. And the last question I want to leave you with is, how do authoritarian regimes keep their power? They do so through two ways, ladies and gentlemen. They exercise that power continuously over their people, and they show their people that they are powerful. Giving China the Olympics and going to those Olympics directly aids them in both of those goals. How does it do that? Well, firstly, in terms of exercising their power, you can see that they're clamping down on the human rights of their own people as a direct result of their gains. But secondly, and far more importantly in terms of the long-term politics in China, it allows them to show themselves as popular in the global community and to show themselves as powerful. It allows them to show themselves as a functioning member of the international community and an accepted government within that community. That stymies and stamps out any move for domestic change within China. So in facilitating those two aspects of their power, ladies and gentlemen, we facilitate the furthering of the subjugation of human rights in China, and that is something that this House should not stand for. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stephen. I know I'm not the only one who's a little disappointed by the comparison of human rights to nuclear war when we all expected to see a spirited jig. But hopefully, Our good friend Eric Atchison will be able to come up and tell us exactly why God should bless America. Man of the floor.
Obviously, before my time begins, there are a few people whose praises I need to sing, and by sing, I mean thank, not actually sing. First, thank you to Brett Northup for the work he does as the Irish Debates Coordinator, and to the selection committee for their focus, foresight, and complete lack of moral courage it took to come up with an NPDA team consisting of myself, Jess Ryan, and Adam Kretz. Both of whom, regardless of the collective emptiness of our own moral courage and probably our souls, they're amazing to work with, and it's been a lot of fun preparing for this debate. Thank you as well to Lewis & Clark's Director of Forensics, Dr. Steve Hunt, for supporting my candidacy for this particular debate, and for creating a team that has been incredibly fun to compete with for the past 4 years. It's been a privilege. In fact, it's been breathtakingly, amazingly, fantastically, wonderfully good even. Sorry, I had to do it. But on that note, I also want to welcome the Irish to the United States. We're glad you all turned 21 because our drinking laws are unfortunately a little more oppressive here than in Europe, so we're glad that you all are of age, and hopefully we can all go to the bar and sympathize over British oppression. Ours was a couple hundred years ago, but yeah. I also really wanted to open my speech with really funny jokes making fun of how much the Irish drink and how they stereotypically are a giant group of sketchy clods. But then I remember who my regular debate partner is. And if any of you know Scott Cheesewright, you realize why I have a soft spot for really sketchy degenerates who kind of drink too much. But Scott is an amazing debate partner. He's been sort of the creative genius behind a lot of the stuff that we've run. And he is quite literally the cheese to my macaroni. Finally, I just want to quickly recognize my family. They're not here right now, again, because of a lot of the traffic, air traffic sort of stuff, but they'll be here tomorrow and Saturday, and they've supported me in everything that I've done, even when some of those things have been really silly and or stupid. With that, the debate. All right. Ultimately, I will first talk about this Chinese freakout scenario. And I think there are a lot of problems with the way that the Irish debaters have tried to refute Adam's analysis. Most specifically, the idea that if killing the spiritual leaders is going to be really bad, then of course they're going to stop doing it. But this hasn't stopped them before. It hasn't stopped them since the 1950s when they took over Tibet in the first place. That's why the Dalai Lama is living in exile right now. That's why thousands of Tibetan Buddhists have flocked over to Nepal and to India and to many other countries simply because it's a matter of survival. And I think at the point where you ignore that, I think that the reality is that they continue killing spiritual leaders, and I think that all of the news reports that have been coming from CNN and MSNBC, not Fox News, they hate America, I think that shows that just how dangerous the situation is, and it is something that ultimately cannot be ignored. I think that's better. But furthermore, I'd also argue that with the boycott, it's ultimately harder for individuals to be able to protest the Olympics. A lot of these individual protests have been happening right now, such as a number of Greek protesters being arrested when the Olympic torch was lit on its way to Beijing. Now, if we're obviously boycotting the Olympics, we're not going to be there, meaning we aren't going to be able to be there to protest. And I think this is really important because a lot of individuals see this as an important issue. So if anything, boycotting is not the best way to protest the Olympics. The best way is to let the Olympics go on and let individuals be able to voice their complaints as they best see fit. I'll get to you when I feel like it, or one of you, I'll do eeny, meeny, miny, moe or something. The other argument here is, I think that's really important, is that this is a huge economic boom for China. Now, the main argument here is, well, that just means that there's more arms going to Khartoum, but I think the argument that Adam makes here is that if you increase Chinese isolationism, it's going to be a lot harder to get Chinese cooperation with a lot of other issues, including the genocide in Darfur, which I don't think we are going to be able to solve without international cooperation. Without that cooperation, I think the genocide is going to keep happening. And so even if money going to the Chinese government means more arms to Khartoum, unfortunately what that means is that if the alternative is isolating China, then that ultimately means there's never going to be an end to this genocide. But furthermore, I would argue, like I said, when I feel like it, they argue that will China let journalists just print whatever they want? My first argument to this is that journalists already are, otherwise we wouldn't be hearing about the human rights violations that are already happening in Tibet and that have happened in Taiwan and in the Spratly Islands and in other places. But my next argument is, what is the Chinese government going to do? Are they going to send the journalists to bed without dinner early, before their curfew?
Sir,
I mean, sure.
They're going to do what they're doing now, which is kicking them out of the country and refusing them re-entry.
Okay, and how exactly would that help China when they're trying to like reestablish their image, when there are no journalists to convey that image in the first place? It's entirely pragmatic for China. I think it stands to reason that if the Chinese government is going to want to see its image revamped, they're going to want to keep journalists in the country. That being said, I want you to look to the final points that Adam talks about under the freak out position, which is that China would respond in kind with Tibet, which ultimately makes the situation a whole lot worse. Now, in debate jargon, we might call this linear or something. But ultimately, I think that what Adam says carries a lot of weight, that these protests would get far more rampant, but as a result, so too would the Chinese military response under voyeurism. Now, the main argument here that I get coming from the Irish is that China's already stealing water, which is creating droughts already. But my first argument is US capitalism can solve that. We can give them our bottled water, which is we take it from local people, bottle it, and sell it for like 1,000% markup. Seriously, cheers to Sonny. In all actuality, I think that the other arguments that Adam has been making have been absolutely true. That if you decrease the amount of money going to China, then there isn't going to be water purification happening one way or the other. So at least if money is flowing into China, at least there's a shot at water purification happening, food distribution happening, and more housing being created, not at this time. The next argument here is in terms of the bargaining chip and what leverage it really holds. I think the bargaining chips ultimately vary depending on the individual economic and international situation. They vary from year to year, and they vary from country to country. For instance, if we needed leverage over France, we could just threaten to have Jerry Lewis shot. With China, we have to threaten them with the Olympics. Unfortunately, I think that a boycott would preclude any other threats we had regarding the Olympics, and really any other sort of leverage that we would have with the Chinese government. That being said, I once again want to look to Adam's impacts here, which I think are going to be really important, which most specifically, I think have to deal with like the air quality currently around Beijing. I think this is also really important because it goes back to the analysis that the Irish are talking about the lack of resources in rural areas. A lot of this pollution is coming from the rural areas and floating into Beijing. I think if we're going to be able to put more capital into China, we're ultimately going to be helping the rural areas a whole lot more than we currently are. Sure.
Yeah, it's very difficult to enjoy cleaner air. The Chinese government has stolen your lungs.
It's really hard to enjoy cleaner air when you're polluting our air with your commie propaganda. I quit smoking, and that actually helped a lot. Surprise, surprise. But the next argument I want to talk about here is the isolationism argument. I think you're going to see an increase in isolationism from China because I think it's been empirically proven from a lot of other countries, especially with the 1980 Moscow Olympics example that Adam brings up, that this sort of isolationism didn't stay within Russia. It expanded to over 60 countries around the world that made the Cold War that much colder, and in which Russia ended up responding in kind in 1984 by boycotting our Olympics. This sort of like back and forth response ultimately just increases the isolationism between these two countries, which I think is really important when we need to be able to cooperate on a lot of incredibly important issues, not only just with human rights, but with economics, space exploration, take your pick. So in conclusion, I think ultimately what we have to look to here is whether the boycott will actually have the desired effect that it will or not. We can think that the boycott will make ourselves feel good in whatever sense we feel. We can make ourselves feel more self-righteous, but I think the problem here is that the Irish are too insecure about the US's image. We know we are the baddest MF country in the world. We don't care if we go to the Olympics or not because we know we're number one. So at that point, I don't think it's a problem of our image or our concern with ourselves. We need to concern ourselves with whether or not, pragmatically, the boycott is going to have the desired effect. And I think the arguments that Adam has laid out about how the Chinese government would simply become angered more, and the fact that voyeurism, whether you like it or not, ultimately needs to be left in the private, not the governmental realm, is ultimately going to carry the debate in the Americans' favor. For all these reasons, I am proud to oppose. Thank you.
Talk every year about how drunk the Irish are going to be when they get up here, and I think the reason that that's been toned down a little this year is, have you seen our American debaters? But we've got one more Irish speech that hopefully they can keep it sober for. Our very own terrorist of the stage, who, although he's been training in the mountains of Afghanistan, may not have the moves he needs on the debate court. We would like to welcome Chris Kassan.
Ladies and gentlemen, they give us no response to China's links with Al-Qaeda. They give us no response to the fact that China has weapons of mass destruction. And they tell us that the boycott of the Olympics in 1980 made the Cold War worse. Of course, after 40 years of going to the Olympics with the Soviets and a lot of the time losing, the United States actually got some backbone, stopped going, and of course, Russia got embarrassed on the world stage, and oh look, the Soviet Union collapsed 9 years later. On the other hand, in 1936, nobody had the backbone not to go to the Berlin Olympics. I don't need to tell any of you what happened 3 years after that. No, I don't. There was, oh, I'm sorry, there was a war, a large war. Ladies and gentlemen, this debate is actually about the soul of the United States. This debate is about your place, or in my case, half of my place in the world. Because one thing that really bugs me when I go and visit my family in the United States is things like what the last speaker says, that the United States knows that they're the baddest motherfucker in the world. And when we talk about human rights abuses, they say, are you talking about China or are you talking about the United States? Maybe it comes from the idealism of living in the United States. Maybe it comes from living thousands of miles from the rest of the world. Maybe it comes from never having seen it in person. But if you come from the rest of the world, you know that the United States is not the baddest. You know they're nowhere near the baddest. And you know that any comparison of what the Chinese people go through every single day for the last 50 years, every single day, is nothing in comparison to when America doesn't live up to the ideals that it talks about. And if you want America, if you want your country to start living up to the ideals, then you won't allow your athletes to go to Beijing, to stand in a stadium built, as these guys admitted, with blood money, with the blood money of the literally hundreds of thousands of people who were moved, put into slave labor, or just never seen again so that this Olympics could happen. You won't allow your athletes to go, stand there on a podium, see your flag raised, and hear your anthem sung in that stadium so that the Chinese government can aggrandize itself before the world. It's morally bankrupt to do so, and if the United States has any courage whatsoever, then you'll stand by what you did in the past. Because the idea that the Olympics is some sporting event is a fallacy. In 1920, in Antwerp, and the games there, did the Germans and the Austrians attend after they occupied Belgium for 4 years? No. In 1948, in the Olympics in London, did the Germans and the Japanese get to go? No. In 1972, when the hostage-taking took place in Munich, did we all say, oh, well, at least the Olympics aren't about politics? I mean, I know all those Israeli guys died, but, you know, who cares? In 1976, when 34 African nations were willing to boycott because people had the temerity to invite the apartheid regime in South Africa, was that not a political event? No. And in 1980, after the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, the United States said, these people are not somebody who we are going to be complicit with. But now it's different. Do you know why it's different this time? And they said it themselves. They said, because of all the money flowing into China, because we have to engage with China, and the water purification, and the blah, 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 blah. What does that mean? It means because Walmart, and Ford, and General Motors, and Coca-Cola, and NBC are bankrolling the Olympics. And because a dollar made in China is a dollar to loan to the United States to keep your economy afloat. The reason the United States won't stand up to the Soviet Union is not because the Chinese aren't as bad as the Soviet Union. You can be damn sure they are every bit as bad. It's because America does business with China when America didn't do business with the Soviet Union. Sure.
Yeah, you talk all about these good global ideals, but why hasn't your country stood up, or your people stood up, and said that
Because, ladies and gentlemen, we in Europe realize that what the United States does, the rest of the world will follow.
No,
No, because it's true. Because it's true. Because everybody knows that the only country that it matters, like if Ireland doesn't go to the Olympics, if Ireland doesn't go to the Olympics, oh my God, we won't be able to have the Olympics. Ireland might win some medals and then have to give them back because our one medalist ever was on drugs. It'd be terrible. Like, stop being so glib with the, oh, other people won't go. Oh, my God. And the other point, China will get pissed off. Now, seriously, let's think about their case. Let's just go through it one by one. China will get pissed off. Yes, that is true. That's because we're saying, we won't go to your multi-billion-dollar event because you're genocidal, totalitarian, human rights abusing, lying, thieving, organ stealing, oppressing bastards. The threat of a boycott is better. This is genius. Hi, Mr. President Who. This is President Bush. We're totally going to boycott your Olympics. Okay. It's okay, I was only kidding. Individual protests are better. First of all the Olympic committees have told their athletes not to make political statements. You know, the Black Power guys didn't get on too well in '68, if you didn't notice. They got thrown out of the Olympic Games. They tried to take their medals away. And if you actually think that the drugged up athletes are going to wave their Save Darfur flags and the Chinese are going to be like, yes, now I am your government mentor. I will now bring you, Mr. BBC journalist, who is actually banned from China, to see pro-Darfur protests being held by Taiwanese athletes in Olympic Village. Like, their case is about believable on that, as Elliot Spitzer saying to his wife, honestly, honey, I was just at Starbucks getting a latte. There's an economic boom from Chinese people, and infrastructure was built, and water was purified, and air was purified because of the Olympics. And if we don't have the Olympics, the Chinese won't build any infrastructure, and they won't purify any air, and they won't purify any water. Right. So if the Olympics hadn't been given to the Chinese government would have been like, well, we could build some roads, I suppose. There's some economic development to be had, but to be honest, I don't really give a shit. So, And if that's the case, then are they actually expecting us to believe that in September, the Olympics are over, the Chinese government will be like, no need for all this oppression anymore. Now my favorite point, if we don't have the Olympics, the foreign journalists won't be able to tell us what's really going on in China. Like, you know, they aren't now. And there'll be isolation, because the Chinese won't want to make any money off, you know, the 70 million, you know, countries that they're going to have to put trade sanctions on because they're really pissed off about us not coming to the Olympics, because, you know, well, we don't really know why, except that in theoretical debater land, when you insult somebody, that means they don't like you, which means that engagement doesn't happen, which leads to negative externalities, and therefore the causative effect means that the Chinese will fire nuclear weapons at other people. And, like, I don't know, shoot some monks or, you know, execute like 40,000 people a year, or all that kind of stuff is going to happen. Brent is waving at me to stop talking, but I think you get the idea. What they said made no sense. If the United States wants to be the leader for liberty, for the Olympic ideals of freedom, equality, and common humanity, which you should, and which we should, then you should say you're just as bad as the Soviets were in 1980. What's going on in Darfur and Tibet and Taiwan and all over China is absolutely not acceptable, and we will stand up and with one voice we will say, not in our name, you won't play our anthem, you won't show our flag, and we ain't gonna turn on the television no matter what station you put it on. You can have your Olympics, but there'll be a sham Olympics because you're a sham host.
there really brought the house down. Sure. Before we get to our last speaker, I'd like to say that, I'm really honored to be chosen to get to be up here on stage tonight without actually having to answer the Irish. And I'm a little sad for all of you that they picked probably one of the most awkward and least funny girls in the community. But hopefully our Chuck Norris of the Midwest, Jess Ryan, will come up here and, kick some American butt and bring us back. But I gotta say, in my heart, I've got a place for the cat bad strategy.
So I get 9.5 minutes too, right? Yeah, I'd like to start out with a few thank yous. My family has traveled a long way to be here, and especially I want to thank my girlfriend Danielle, who is the most beautiful, intelligent, and caring person that I know in the entire world. She's here, and if you want to meet the perfect person, you should try to introduce yourself, because she's amazing. Also, my grandparents are here, my mom and her boyfriend, my dad, and also my girlfriend's mom, Michelle, who is also very nice. These are all great people, and they might be the only people standing for the Americans at the end of the debate, but I hope that's not the case. On the lines of the tournament, and also USOF, I want to thank USOF campus for hosting, as well as not checking my background before letting me on campus. That's a joke. Seriously though, don't check. On the line of the tournament, I wanted to thank Joe for tabbing. Really, really thank you, Joe, for tabbing. Thank you, Joe. Anyway, okay, two things that I was pretty nervous about in this debate. Fairly obvious is the first one is that I'm wearing a suit. A lot of you know that I don't do this regularly. In fact, I haven't worn a suit since I was in high school. I expected some applause there, but I did have a shirt picked out for this debate. It was a t-shirt, and it was green, and it had a 4-leaf clover on it, and it said, "Irish, I were drunk." But once I found out we were debating China, I thought that might be a bad idea just because of misinterpretation. It's like there's a few people that got it over here. It's spreading. Right, exactly, yeah, see? Well, of the three of you, I'm not surprised you're the one that got that. Okay. As for Kristen specifically and the fishing trip, first of all, if you were from Wyoming, you would have known how to get out of the mud. And second of all, if you were so much smarter and better than us, you wouldn't have listened to me in the first place. So, I mean, aside from that, let's get on to the debate. First and foremost, I think the first speaker made an important mistake when he said that there are two types of boycott. That one is that you can just send ugly fat people. First of all, underneath or wearing an American flag, there is no such thing as an ugly American. That's a big mistake. Moreover, they make a lot of arguments about how China are bad people. My first argument is just going to be a little clarification. Yes, the government of China does a lot of bad things. Congratulations, you figured that one out. We think the problem is conflating the Chinese government with the Chinese people. We make a lot of arguments about how the Chinese government being bad and evil is not a reason to ignore some sort of a support for the Chinese people that will get jobs as a result of this. I'll talk more specifically about that in a bit, and I also promise to answer at least twice as many questions as any of you have later in the debate. They say that the Olympics is, that we need to show them by refusing to go, that we don't support what their government is doing. I have two questions to this argument. First and foremost, is this the only way to show them that we don't approve of what they're doing? This is the only way for the United States to engage with China and talk to them about the problems we see in their government. The only way to talk to them and engage them is to not talk with them and engage them. This doesn't make a lot of sense to me. My second question is, will it be effective? I hear them talk a lot about the bad things in China and talk about how great it would be if Bush was like, okay, I'm not going to go over there because you're bad, okay? That's not going to do anything, okay? You only solve problems through engagement. You only solve issues with international relations by going to the country and talking to their people, by increasing the lower and middle class of their people. We say that the only way to do that is by hiring thousands of translators and also supporting local businesses, restaurants, entrepreneurs, people that can fix the problems of all the Americans that are going over there and don't understand anything about Chinese culture. Those people that are getting the jobs are not going to be the people that are sending guns overseas. Those are not going to be the people that are stealing organs. We say that those people should be the focus of this debate, not what the United States federal government and what China is doing in international policy. Yes.
Dude, you don't stop that. You don't stop that by saying you're bad, okay, I'm not coming. We say that the better way to stop that is by going over there, engaging with tens of thousands of journalists, which you say hasn't happened yet, and we say, that's right, it hasn't happened yet, which means the only propensity for solving is by having those 20,000 journalists show up, and having those types of people engaging with people in English and also in Mandarin. The second speaker, I was specifically impressed that it took us 1 minute and 30 seconds to get to nuclear war. This just shows how out of touch with American debate you actually are. 1 minute 30 is a record. Not for how fast we got to it, but for how long it took us to get there. But moreover, the second speaker says that less economy equals less guns to war zones. Those guns are going even if you boycott. Our argument is that the 60,000 translators needed, the thousands of fixers that will be hired to help foreign teams and journalists, and also the people that are not, those people that are going to be benefiting from the business where thousands upon thousands of people descend on that area are not the people that are going to be sending those bombs. We say that it's much more likely that you can engage with those people if you go and talk to those people instead of just saying government bad. Okay, not at this time. He also asked the question, how do authoritarians maintain power? My first argument is that they do it by remaining closed off from the rest of the world. The ways these authoritarian governments remain in power is they keep the journalists out. They don't let people engage with civilians. They don't engage with our politicians that will go to these Olympic Games, but will not go there now that they boycott. We think those are the ways that they remain closed off. Moreover, they do it again by not engaging in peaceful diplomacy with other nations. We say the only propensity for that peaceful engagement to happen is in a world where we're sending diplomats to the opening ceremony, diplomats to watching games, people that are going to talk directly with their government like Bush is going over there to do. I mean, he's not the greatest person in the world, but it's better to go and talk to them about the issues we have with their government than it is to just say, you're bad, I'm not showing up. Not at this time. The third speaker makes a lot of arguments, and I can see why they saved him for last. First and foremost, I think that it's an important thing to point out that the European Union and every other nation going to attend the Olympics has absolutely ruled out a boycott. They're trying to say that once the United States boycotts, everybody else will boycott. In a world in which the EU has dedicated to going, and other nations have dedicated to going, I don't think this is the case. And moreover, when the United States has said repeatedly that there is no option of a boycott on the table, it is a bad thing in our change of relations to say now, we're not going. That type of a flip-flop is bad, okay? Yeah, sure.
European Parliament's actually debating boycott next week.
No, they're not. No, first of all, you're mistaken on what they're debating. They're not debating a boycott. They're debating whether or not to send politicians to the opening ceremony. That's a very different debate. That's just talking about politicians, elected officials is what they specifically talk about not going. That is not a boycott. That's a different thing. Sorry, you just didn't talk about the other million types of boycotts that exist in Olympics, not just like I've already answered twice as many questions as you guys did. Go on to their Chinese, they make the argument that Chinese people go through this every day and we let it happen, that by going over there we make this an applicable thing, an okay thing. We say, first of all, you're going to let it happen every single day by not sending any US diplomats. You're going to do it by not using the United States international media to expose the problems that we're talking about. We say that you do it by not engaging with the rest of the world. This type of closed-off mentality has never solved a problem. In fact, I think even you have talked about instances where it has increased problems and increased the propensity for violence. You're right, it might not result in a nuclear war, but I think if you owe a country billions upon billions of dollars, it's a bad idea to slap them in the face. We give you specific reasons why engagement is the best option. Moreover, they say that every single dollar is used to keep the U.S. afloat through loans, and this is something that got a lot of praise from you. I think this argument is just not responsive to our arguments. We say that the money will not necessarily be going to the Chinese government. It will be spending in the billions of dollars range into people that are needed as translators, those people that are being hired to escort our diplomats around and also escort our Olympians to the stages. We think that these types of situations are much more likely to increase awareness about those things. We think that by hiring those people that have volunteered to learn English and also come forward in educating themselves and people around them are people that will be able to directly relate to the Chinese people. No, thank you. We think this only option here is to do a boycott. I think more and more at the end of this debate, it's a very simple question. Is China a bad government? Yes, they're a bad government. But will boycotting them solve all of the Chinese government's problems? Our answer is absolutely not. Our only chance for solving this type of a problem is by making sure that they live up to the standards they've made in the Olympic Committee, which they're still working on. You say it's a foregone conclusion. But we say that the steps they've taken are first steps and that they have come a long way. We say that their only propensity for them to continue to improve, to continue to get better, is to continue to engage them and make sure that they meet the Olympic Committee's responsibilities. We say that this type of engagement is the absolute best thing that can happen. Yes, your third question.
This is the way that we've shown to engage with the actual people. So in all of these English translators, arrive there and go,
you don't engage with
where
the
are all
people.
of the American people? That's what happens.
You don't engage with the Chinese people. You don't. You just boycott the Olympics. You say, federal government, you're not doing the right thing, so we're not going to send our people over there. That's the basic difference here. We say the only chance for a solution is through engagement. You say that just turning our backs on them is going to be a better situation. I think that we've given you a lot of reasons why both engagement and pumping those dollars into the economy in China and the base of the economy in China is what's going to be more likely to institute real change. Thank you.